This is the end of the world. Where is the most dangerous place on Earth that you would never want to visit? There are several famous places in the world that Google will offer you if you check it out, like Snakes Island in Brazil or Skeleton Beach in Namibia. One area that is very mysterious and not easy to explore due to its geographical conditions is the Arctic, which is on the list of scary places. But what scares the Arctic? Why doesn't anyone want to look here more often? Many polar expeditions have, in a strange way, turned into disaster, known as expeditions carried out with specific objectives by a group. In the past, expeditions were carried out by ship, and many ships got stuck in the ice and people died there. Some ships also sank and were never found. The northern region of the planet and the region of the northern frozen ocean still has many unknowns. We also have very little information from under the ice in this area. Before we delve into the goings on beneath the Arctic ice, let's take a look at the waters around it. The Arctic lies in the middle of the frozen Northern Ocean and is covered by ice. The thickness of this sheet's ice is approximately 2 to 3 meters, and it flows on an ocean whose water depth varies from 1,000 to 5,500 meters. There's one big difference between the North and South Poles. Antarctica is a large landmass covered with ice, meaning that if the ice melts, it lies below the landlocked Antarctica. But there's no terrestrial subarctic. The ice flows underwater and is constantly moving. The funny thing is that the Arctic is warmer than the South Pole. In case it looks like, because the whole thing is covered in ice and it doesn't have land, it should be colder, but it's not. Of course, both poles are quite cool, because direct sunlight doesn't shine on them. But because there's water under the North Pole, the surrounding water, which is warmer and moves, warms the ocean water, and the temperature of the Arctic decreases. Antarctica, on the other hand, is dry and lies 2,300 meters above sea level, which causes temperature to drop to minus 60 degrees Celsius in winter and to minus 28 degrees in summer. While in the Arctic, it is minus 40 degrees in winter and it can reach zero in summer. This has an important point. The Antarctic region receives more than 170,000 visitors each year, of which about 20,000 eventually go to and visit the main point of Antarctica, while the Arctic region receives 1 million visitors each year and only 1,000 of them go to the main point of the Arctic. Why does it have to be this way? The first reason is the barriers to its entrance. Arctic has more complex interior barriers. The main reason too is that it doesn't have a fixed position and it's just a big ice moving through the ocean, so the only way to visit the Arctic is either via helicopter in March and April, or via icebreaker ships between May and August. This is the only time of year when the ice is so thin that icebreakers can move into the waters, which is why only 5 trips a year are made to the North Pole. But these are not the only problems. Imagine you're walking in a place like a forest or desert where there's nothing around you. In these areas, if you get lost, you don't find any familiar signs. If you're in the woods, you're surrounded by trees, and in the desert, where there's no other signs, so you're definitely lost. But your best chance of getting out of these areas is to use a compass. You can use the compass to figure out which way to go. But if you get lost at the North Pole, it means you're in a big trouble. Whereas a compass is an ideal navigation tool, but at the North Pole, it doesn't point north. The Earth's magnetic pole is not the same as the North geographical pole. The magnetic pole that the compass points to is about 1,600 kilometers away from the real north and is close to Canada. However, the magnetic pole doesn't have a fixed position. The difference between the North Pole and the north direction shown in the compass is an angle called declination in astronomy, and that is the difference in angle between the two. At high latitudes, local disturbance in the Arctic could cause the compass needle to drift away from the magnetic North Pole, according to US Geological Survey. This magnetic difference sometimes becomes so great that it may even point south. So if you get lost in the Arctic, it would be completely useless to use a compass. So what do the rest of the people who go on expeditions do? They use special maps. These things, we said, were scientific reasons that would make it hard for you to enter the Arctic. Along with the scientific reasons, there are practical reasons. One of the most important points is the shelter. No one lives in the Arctic, not even the famous Inuit people who are in the polar regions adjacent to Russia and Greenland and Canada have never made a home in the Arctic. The ice is constantly moving. The size of the ice can be halved in the summer. No one has seriously attempted to form a community in the Arctic to build a permanent settlement, because the settlements either disappear or are destroyed by the melting of ice. Even if you want to travel around, you may face big obstacles. These icebergs are glaciers in the ocean that have separated from the poles, causing many problems for ships, like what happened to the famous Titan. The problem is no longer the Arctic being water. It sounds funny to be at the pole with the sea all around you but still have water problems, because there's no drinking water in the Arctic. Early explorers of the pole struggled with the problem of thirst. Finding drinking water at the pole is as hard as finding water in the desert. Salt water could not be drunk, so seawater didn't work. The only way was to eat snow, which was also dangerous because it quickly lowers the body temperature. They had to melt the snow, but at the time, the explorers had no suitable heating method for turning ice into water, so many Arctic explorers never returned home. But the next problem is survival in the Arctic. There are no plants in the Arctic. Trees and plants need soil, and since the Arctic is a big chunk of ice, it doesn't allow any plants to grow. If a plant was growing too, the plant wouldn't survive because the temperature is negative there and it's all over the ice. It's so dark for a few months of the year and there's no sun, but plants need photosynthesis. The Arctic is a harsh habitat because there's no photosynthesis here. The presence of plants is completely ruled out here. The Arctic is a harsh habitat because it doesn't allow animals to live either. Foxes and polar bears and many other animals rarely migrate to the Arctic because it is a harsh and uncertain region. Because the Arctic is constantly on the move, it doesn't allow animals to migrate regularly or settle and form families. Polar bears, however, were frequently spotted around the Arctic looking for food. Polar bears are stronger and more dangerous than the other bears and attack more. This makes life difficult for someone who wants to build a habitat there. Also, deep in the waters of this region, it has its own unique habitat, the most dangerous of which is Greenland sharks. These animals on the ice and underwater have created dangerous conditions. For these scientific and practical reasons, we think of the Arctic as a scary region. Even exploring here is no easy task, let alone living and having fun. Now, do you find it hard to live in the Arctic or in the desert? And if you had to choose between the Arctic and the desert, which would be your choice?